FMC when FMC had been going for 41 years, but I think that's validation of where we were at by that point. So thank you, retrospectively. And for anybody who hasn't heard about FMC, just a quick thing about where we have been, where we've come from, so that we can then talk about what's coming up next. So 91 years ago we were started, and it was all down in Auraki, and I know some of you know this story, but it's the thing that we are here to do primarily. So down there you had some commercial forces at play. They were trying to hoover up rather too much more of the public good than really was their due. And so you had this loose collective of clubs. So you had the Alpine Club, some from around here, Tararua, fended off, I suppose you would say in conclusion, fended off that private proposal. But of course, that sort of proposal is always going to come because there's money to be made there, and that is a primary reason for FMC's existence. And underlying that, though, you don't go and fight that sort of fight unless you have really good driver for doing so, and that is the freedom of the hills that we so much talk about. It's that intangible sense of those freedoms of those hills, the conservation values that underlie, and going through there as people recreating with light feet, going on nature's terms. That has been our driving thing since. That is why you have an executive of people, usually 13 plus a vice president, president, coming back every year to spend a lot of time doing this work because we know what the value is. Anyway, since then, we have got to 100 clubs, and I should say that we have Rebecca Gray in the audience, and she can tell you more about our club membership than anybody. She's the FMC administrator, and she's marvellous. So now, Rebecca, I may have got this slightly wrong, but I think we have 100 clubs and now 23,000 members sitting in there, thereabouts.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. We advocate alongside other organisations, other outfits that do similar stuff. We've sort of got our conservation buddies, and then we've got our recreation buddies. We sit somewhere in the middle. We've got Forest and Bird and EDS in particular on the conservation side. And then we have recreation groups like New Zealand Deerstalkers Association and the Game Animal Council on the recreation side. Our constitution has 3 main points. It's pretty simple: recreation, conservation, and public access. So, and we have a vertical sort of a structure. I think it's really useful because we are governors and managers and we are operational people in some sort of combination all the time. So we do the governance stuff, we're always in the law, but we also write letters, meet clubs, and understand what goes on the ground. Where our relationships lie, that's largely up above. We talk with ministers and other MPs, we talk with local body politicians, outfits like the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, fellow NGO leaders, DOC, senior managers and others, LINZ, the Commissioner for Crown Lands, councils. Because that's where things get done, that's where plans get written, and plans can be changed, and arms can be twisted behind backs and things like that. So what have we achieved? I think that our flagship would be wilderness areas. It's 3% of New Zealand, and these are places where there are no huts, no tracks, no bridges, no markers. There's no obvious sign of humans having been there. It's really an achievement, and it put nature on a pedestal. But we have also been substantially involved in creation of national parks, conservation parks, and a swathe of conservation parks were created when FMC began to advocate on tenure review. And so many of them are actually in our hinterland here, and I have no doubt are probably visited by you fairly often. We've made huge gains through tenure review, whether it's been to create conservation parks or anything else. Legislation generally, we submit on pretty much any legislation that's going through that has an impact on what goes on in the lands that we love and the freedom of the hills and public access. So, for example, and I should say another thing that we've achieved there is the Mountain Safety Council way back in the 1960s was partial creation by us alongside New Zealand Deerstalkers Association and others. The legislation that we've been involved with more recently goes as far as civil aviation legislation, because we have an interest in that with respect to our hang gliding members. The RMA reforms. So that's ongoing at the moment. We want to make sure that environment comes first, environment then human endeavours, which would be a real, that would be a gain on what we've got at the moment, which puts human endeavours equal with environment. And other bits of legislation as well. Other things too, like incorporated societies, which sounds deadly dull and everything, but it does actually affect how outfits such as the South Canterbury Tramping Club runs. Forgotten lands is another one that I should mention here, because we have been instrumental in getting the 1/3 of public conservation land, which has no specific classification, to the point where it is now being reclassified. And it's got its own problems actually going on, but this is a serious thing. It's about 9 to 10% of New Zealand, which is being reclassified from something that is considered vulnerable into something else which is less so, such as national park or scientific reserve or scenic reserve. So that's where we sit, and what next is the thing. So I'll tell you what I see coming up next for FMC and for conservation and recreation generally, and I'd like to leave about 10 minutes for some questions at the end. The absolute biggest thing on our horizon is conservation legislative reform. So at the moment, we've got good and bad. We've got legislation which puts nature right at the centre of things and values it for its own sake. And it's right there in the black letter of the law. It says that it will be preserved and protected for nature's intrinsic worth or nature's intrinsic value, depending on which act you're looking at. Now, this is really good. It's non-economic, it's non-parochial, and it's, as far as possible, non-anthropocentric. Really good stuff. I would like to see that stay. And that's the tricky thing, because around that you've got oodles of acts. In fact, DOC has got something like 40 that it has to at least pay some attention to, even if it's not the primary administrator of. That's a lot. And as you go through, you get other bits of the law change, you get a new treaty settlement here or there. It just makes DOC's work harder, and the gears just don't mesh very well anymore. So how do you keep that core of the legislation that puts nature out the front and says to everybody, this is how you go, you respect nature, and it keeps tramping good. It keeps us going out there in nature on nature's terms. It's respectful of the land that sits under our feet. How do you keep that, but get all these mechanical issues sorted out as well? If I were the Minister of Conservation, I would seek to do that, to keep that core of nature for its own sake right there. I bring it up front even further. I put bold type over it. But some rationalisation of these other bits is needed. So that's what I'd do. I would keep the legislation that we've got, but I would be for repealing other bits of legislation, bringing the necessary bits into the current legislation we've got, just ironing the wrinkles out. This is something that's been said several times in high places, and I think that we probably need to start pushing for that more. Other things coming up. Now, I know I've written about this often enough, so you probably know that the Crown Pastoral Land reforms went through in May. So that wiped out tenure review, much to our dismay, because that just gained us all this extra conservation land. Our argument was that we keep doing that, running tenure reviews, but we nobble the downsides to the process. Anyway, our argument didn't win the day, but we have got a few things out of this legislative review. And for legal geeks out there, if you have a look at sections 24 and 60 and 89 in the Crown Pastoral, the Land Act, there are some interesting little bits there that might really gain us as recreationists something out in the Crown Pastoral Estate. So one of them brings the Outdoor Access Commission into being, into the scene. So they've got a role advocating for public access now. They never had that before. We've also got this little bit, Section 60, where easements have always been able to be created through the Land Act across leases, but they've never been done for recreational purposes. Well, now DOC's got a role in that bit of the legislation. There could be no other reason aside from conservation management and or recreation, both. There's another bit where you've got, where there's been difficulty for, there's been difficulty in gaining public access to, through leases, potentially to public land beyond. There's now a provision for the Outdoor Access Commission to talk with the Commissioner of Crown Lands to try and get things ironed out. So this is all early days, but we have high hopes there, and we've got our sights particularly focused on Mount White, where we think it's a good place to start and test out some of these bits of legislation, because there's an overseas leaseholder there who has made himself pretty much universally disliked, and so there may not be too many toes to be trodden on, not with great sorrow anyway. That sounds very harsh, doesn't it? However, I'm without remorse. The fellow there has shut off access up the Poulter at the moment, so that's coming from somewhere. Forgotten lands. This is moving on. This nationwide fast-tracked project. We've got the Western South Island recommendations for all of that stewardship land on the west coast. Now, something like 84%, I think, of the land on the west coast is public conservation land, and a huge amount of that is stewardship land. So once again, it has no specific classification such as national park or scenic reserve. That is going through reclassification at the moment. The outcomes are due by the end of the year. We've advocated really hard on that. And I have high hopes of a decent outcome there. We're running into an